All right, so here we are with section 5 of chapter 8, which is going to deal with a time of crises that is going to take place towards the end of what we'd call the High Middle Ages, and going to usher us into what we'd call the Renaissance, leading into the modern era. And it's going to look pretty bleak, but comparatively to the fall of Rome and the Dark Ages and the Viking invasions, it actually, though it looks bad, is going to usher in the modern era. We're going to see it's not a good time, but it shows us that Europe has recovered so completely that it can withstand even a plague that's going to kill one third of the population, religious upheaval, warfare. It's gonna show that Europe is back, and if not just back, ready to become the dominant power, probably on the planet at the time, and even start to rival China with its technological innovation and whatnot. Once we get to the time period we know as the Renaissance. Here we see, though, this map's going to kind of show you one of the big pandemics that will ever shake the foundations of Western Europe or perhaps even the world. Um, between 1348 and 1350, 1347, let's say, I guess, if you want to count some of these islands here, one third of the population of Europe is going to die from a pandemic, a plague. We'll talk about that a little bit. So we do have a very, very big time of crisis here in the beginning of the 14th century. So the 1300s, though we're going to see the great intellectual movements you heard about in Mr. Winter's Flips, cathedrals, universities, and whatnot, it will be a time that there's going to be numerous crises faced that really usher in, we'd say, the end of the Middle Ages and the beginnings of what we call the modern era as ushered in by the Renaissance. You're going to have a combination of plague, war, and religious upheaval, and it's going to, for a while, seem like the end of the world. But instead of the world ending and another dark age beginning, Europeans actually get out of these crises almost better than they were before. And it's surprising, but it shows you just the level of recovery that's taken place in those 300 years between about the year 1000 and about the year 1300. So it's certainly a terrifying period, a difficult period, but also really, I think the foundations of the modern world are during this 14th century when Europe bounces back from just one after another crisis. Number one, the biggest crisis of the time, something you've all probably heard about, is going to be what we call today the Black Death. And really probably what we know as a pandemic of what we'd call plague, which is three different types. But the prevalent historical thinking is this bubonic plague. You have a lot of historians who think maybe it wasn't, maybe it was something different. But as of now, we still go with that idea that it was the bubonic plague. Um, Allegedly, bubonic plague is a disease with the Latin name Yersinia pestis. Basically, it's a disease in which an infected rat would pass on the disease to a flea. And when a flea jumps on another rat or a person, it tries to numb the spot it's going to bite. So it injects this like kind of like regurgitation coagulant, anticoagulant into your system. And basically, in doing so, it releases the bacteria or the virus that becomes bubonic plague, which is a terrible disease. So we actually think because of the sanitary conditions in Europe and the easiness in which rats move around the entire planet, from ships to grain carts to wherever, this disease pretty much perhaps is caused by that. We're getting some new historical theories that perhaps it was actually spread pneumonically, which means through the air and infected the lungs, or septicemically through the blood in just contagion of kind of blood being mixed with other people. But we'll see what happens in the next couple of years with scholarship. But right now, we're still going to go with the flea on rat theory. Um, we think that the disease begins in the steppes of Mongolia, and as the Mongols at this time conquer all these different places under their leader Genghis Khan and other leaders after him, these Mongol armies kind of spread this plague, and then it kind of gets into the rat population, and then the rats move and are migrating, and then all of a sudden you get the fleas biting people because nobody bathes, and that's pretty much how it spreads. By the 1300s, by the 12, I should say by the 1200s, again, the disease was pretty much devastating Asia and beyond. We think about 35 million people perhaps died of plague in China in the early 1300s alone. So we're starting to do do some scholarship and research in that. So just think of that compared to the relatively small European population. So 35 million in China, we think, died of this disease. So terrible disease. Um, and we had seen it happen before. I mean, during the time of Justinian, in the 500s, we had seen it show up in Constantinople, but not this strong. This is the big thing. It's everywhere at this point. We think we have the patient zero of how it reaches Europe. The city of Kaffa, which is a trade city on the Black Sea, was run by Italian merchants, and the Mongols from the east, like the Huns before, they were going to come over here, and they're going to lay siege to Kaffa and these Italian merchants. And they're actually, they're going to have some people who die of plague, but they're probably kind of inoculated of it by that point. They'll have a couple of Mongol soldiers who die of plague in their camp, and the Mongols decide that the best way to deal with these stupid Italian merchants is to catapult the dead Mongols of the plague into the city walls and to hope that, it's kind of like biological warfare, that the disease will spread. Well, it just so happens the plague probably shows up in Italy when a couple ships that had evacuated Kaffa are found washed up on a beach with all the people inside them dead. So it looks like that biological warfare of the Mongols actually worked, and probably the disease was going to get there via trade routes anyways, and does, I'm sure. But the first talk of this disease in the ports of Europe come from ships leaving that city of Kaffa that had been under siege by the Mongols. So it's pretty interesting to think about. Also, like watching bodies over walls. It's not fast, but hey, I think it actually worked in the end. Um, in the next 5 years, one third of the Western European population will be wiped out. So think of that. One out of every three people. If you think of the United States population, that's a little more than 100 million people dead in 5 years. So imagine that. For every family unit's right about three, if not more people. So you would have lost a direct family member. I mean, the odds are. And then think of that. Just unbelievable. And also, you have no idea what's going on with germs and microbes and whatnot. So, people are just dropping dead. You have no idea of science, right? So you're going to be like, God hates us, all these different things. So there's going to be different ways people are going to deal with this plague. So it's pretty crazy. And again, research is changing on this. So if you really read into it, some people have different theories, but this is the accepted theory up to this point. Bubonic plague spread by the Mongols to the west really crushes even places like, I think the city of Cairo, Egypt was losing like 11,000 people a day at the height of the plague. It's really just crushing everybody. So here are some symptoms of the plague. Day one, you're going to get some swelling in your armpits and groin. Anywhere you have like lymph nodes, big giant swells are going to be, can be as big as an apple, kind of gross. Day two, you start to vomit. You develop a fever, not fun. Day three, you're going to get some bleeding under your skin, which is going to cause you big black splotches, aka the Black Death. Day four, it's going to attack your nervous system. It's going to cause you to have spasms, terrible pain. Day five, you're pretty much going to enter a coma and die. Or the buboes, as it's where your word boo boo comes from, a little baby, oh, we get a boo boo. They used to call these buboes, these big apple-sized swellings. Sometimes they would actually open and black liquid would pus out. That actually meant you might live, which is good. If not, you're just going to enter a coma and you're going to be dead. So these are some of the symptoms. Not good. And again, you have no idea at this point of science. Like you're like, there's no such thing as harms. People just start dying everywhere. So this is going to have profound social effects. Obviously, number one, if you can imagine like any kind of pandemic contagion, we're also probably due for one of these. It's been a long time, like 1918, I think, was the last great pandemic with the Spanish flu. Like 18 million people died in the world. Terrible. So I guess we're due. So watch out, wash your hands. But I mean, if this happens, at least we know about like microbes. These people don't. They're gonna be freaking out. So people are gonna handle this in different ways. Like literally, people dropping dead all around you of this like random disease that just showed up in the ports and then spread over the trade routes and all that. Some are going to turn away from the church and they're going to go to like magic and witchcraft. They're going to think that, let's get some witches, try some spells, incantations, magic. Some people are going to do that. Other people are going to be like, well, everybody we know is dying. We could die at any moment. So what are we doing working? Why don't we just party? Let's just have a time till we die. and we're going to get a famous phrase: "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die." So it's kind of like the YOLO of its generation. Just have a good time because you're probably going to die tomorrow. There were cities actually where people thought if they were having a good time, they wouldn't die. So like they would dance until they were so exhausted they'd pass out. Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. But other people are going to go the opposite end of the spectrum and be like, this is God punishing us. God hates us. And we're going to have a bunch of people who literally leave their jobs, leave their lives. They walk from town to town. They go to the town center and they try to encourage other people to scourge themselves. Like you take like a whip and you tie like metal things to it and you whip your back and you're trying to show yourself like, I'm sorry, God. They're called flagellants. And the Latin word for whip is flagellum. So they basically whip themselves into a frenzy in the center of all these towns. And that's really healthy when you have a communicable disease to start throwing your blood around in the public square. So not the best thing, but that happens too. So it's either party or like the opposite end. Like it's crazy. As usual, though, a bunch of people are going to blame the Jews. They're going to say that the Jews, poisoned the wells. A lot of anti-Semitism. Jews are going to be run out of town. Really terrible time. And again, the poor Jews also are probably holding the loans and the banking. So you have other reasons to chase them out and kind of get that anti-Semitism that will haunt Europe all the way into the 20th century, even maybe today. And another sad thing is like families will literally turn on one another. Like grandma coughs, and you're gonna be like, "Get out of the house," because I really don't want to die. Or if the town knows that your whole house has plague, they literally board up your house, put big black crosses on the windows, and leave you in there to die, or even set the house on fire with you in it. So people are gonna turn on one another. It's not a good time. But here's the thing of it: if this is happening in your lives, 100 million people just starting to drop dead, you'd be freaking out too and probably hiding from anybody who could be contagious with the disease. But along with the social effects, you're going to have large scale economic effects. Obviously, you're going to have a ton of employers and employees die, um, and the economy is going to lose its footing for a while. But again, though, the people who do survive are going to be saying, "Hey, wait a second, I made it. This is great. I'm in demand." So all these peasants who were like getting the shaft all these years are going to be like, "Hey, how about some higher wages?" And we're going to get inflation going on. So there's going to be more money in the economy because people are going to lose their fortunes because they're dead. And everything's going to kind of correct for a bit. So you're going to get a lot of upheaval. The landowners, though, are going to say the lords are going to be like, I don't want to pay you anymore. So get off my land. I'm going to put a bunch of sheep there. I'm going to sell their wool. And so you're going to get like all these unemployed peasants roaming around Europe, and you're going to get large scale rebellion. And there's going to be revolts and putting down revolts. It's not going to be a good situation. It's going to take about 100 years for that economy to stabilize. About 100 years for things to kind of calm down and get us into the height of the Renaissance when things are doing better, at least for your average everyday peasant at this time. Here we see some pictures here. Here we see outside the village walls, everybody's dying, throwing people in trenches. Here we see you got these people dying of the plague, the buboes. This guy's like casting spells up here. That's great. And here's basically what a doctor would have worn. So it looks kind of like a bird. They would have put a bunch of flowers and spices in the beak because they literally didn't know there was any kind of thing as like microbes. So they're thinking like, oh, if I smell something bad, that's how I must get the plague. So you have a bunch of people walking around, these bird people. Doesn't work out too well. In fact, unfortunately, the clergy is going to pay the price. Monks, nuns, the friars trying to help people are going to almost be wiped out. Here we see what happens is after this too. Even in like happy pictures, it's like could be like a wedding picture or whatever people are painting. You have like a bunch of skeletons dancing to be like, hey, at any moment you all could die. Okay, so you're gonna call it the dance macabre, where like at any minute, just know you could have the happiest event ever, but looming over you is death. So it's gonna strike at any moment. So that's kind of that. But I'll leave it here now, and then I'll start a new one of these so we can learn a little bit more about the other two important crises that are going to take place during the turbulent 14th century that will usher us into the modern era.